Chapter 2. In the coming weeks, Jean didn't see much of John. The various doctors on duty believed that he might have fallen into a coma, but when Lasco came in at 6 every morning, he reassured her that her husband's body was going through a long period of recuperation. He didn't tell her, however, that this was the longest time he had ever known anyone to lay dormant. The vital signs were normal, though, so he felt there was no cause for alarm. Gabrielle was there most of the time as well, lending support when the other relatives were past their point. Jean had managed to be by his bedside on 2 occasions. The sight of him brought her to tears both times. The evident future made her cry harder. She felt ashamed for not having the strength to be by him daily, but there was also the lawsuit. She dove into that, trying to hide from her guilt. It was the pain inside her which manifested itself on her face that probably won her the settlement. The pain and suffering was clear, and the suit was settled out of court for $6.8 million. The sum didn't bring the smile back, though. In fact, it only made her cry harder. She went over the figures countless times in the waiting room to avoid the thought of entering the healing sanctum. She figured, after all expenses, medical, legal, mortgage, they would have roughly $4.7 million left in their account. She began to ponder the possibilities of investment and remembered about her husband's handicap. She sighed, but the tears wouldn't come. Now she felt horrible for not being able to cry. Somewhere in the dark recesses of her mind, the sadist took control and caused her to rise and walk into the room, hoping the sight of him would start the flow. She walked to the side of the bed and pulled up a chair. She sat motionless for what felt like years. She didn't recall blinking as she looked at her wounded mate lying still. His face held no expression. He looked rather serene. She looked down the length of his body and began to cry when her gaze fell upon his legs. She leaned into the bed and took his hand. She was full force now, allowing the sadness to mount its pony despair. "John, John, John," she muttered to herself. "Johnny, what's going to happen? Why aren't you here with me?" These words came out through sobs. "John, where are you?" She rested her head on the edge of the bed to ride out the pain. The tears didn't stop, but the crying did, abruptly, when she felt the hand she was holding begin to tighten its grip. She raised her chestnut brown head hopefully and was struck speechless as she watched her husband's eyes creep open. They didn't open far, she couldn't even see his baby browns, but they were open, and he was looking at her. "Jean, don't cry, Jeannie. It's gonna be all right." His voice was lower than a whisper. "Jeannie, it's gonna be okay. Not done with me yet." His voice squeaked out. She felt the final few tears flow down their paths on her cheek. "God's not done with me yet." He went back into his stasis. Jean felt his hand go limp again. She didn't cry. She didn't try to keep him with her. She just sat there with her mouth agape. She rested her head on his bed again, trying to contemplate why she felt secure now, strangely secure and frightened. It was the fright that supplemented her sleep. She awoke with a jump when Gabrielle placed a hand on her shoulder. It took her a moment to regain her bearings. Gabrielle was saying something as she checked the machines and recorded the findings. Jean didn't hear her. She was trying to remember if she had dreamed his reassurances, if his momentary consciousness was real. She remembered something about God, and that prompted her to keep it to herself, which in turn continued to cause her to wonder if it actually happened. Her husband had been a firm disbeliever in an all-powerful force for the last 6 years. But what else does a man teetering on the brink of death have to envision, cling to, hope for, aside from an omnipotent deity? "Hey," Jean looked up to her. "You there?" "Yeah, barely." She leaned back in the chair and stretched her arms above her head. She yawned. Gabrielle smiled at her. "You yawn like that, and hippos are gonna be jealous." Jean gave a half-hearted smile and surprised herself with it. Knowing an opportunity when she sees one, Gabrielle told her to come join her for some coffee and conversation. She complied and stretched again before walking. "Gabrielle, you've been so good to us." "Think nothing of it, Mrs. Coletta." "Call me Jean, please." "All right, Jean. I've taken a certain interest in what's going on here." "What do you mean?" "Well, it's not all people that I stick close to in here. We're not really supposed to have any attachment to the patients. There's something special about it. I couldn't really put my finger on it before. Actually, I could. I just didn't want to admit it. Fact is, I knew from the first night you two came in. Here you go, dear. Cream, 1 sugar. Just the way I like it. I know." They each took a sip of the hot beverage. Jean's lips lingered a little longer despite the heat. She wished Gabrielle to continue. "There was something going on. Something in the way your John held on to his consciousness. Something in the peace behind his eyes. He knew what was happening." She paused, but didn't sip. "It was a calm that no one is supposed to have, like he knew why it was happening. I should have realized it then. But I am somewhat of a religious woman, and being so, I'm also a skeptic." She paused, this time to sip. "Should have known what?" Gabrielle pondered a moment. Her eyes went distant again. "Honey, I was in that operating room. Lasco was perched over your John and prepared to push his expertise to the fullest. The operation should have taken 2 hours. We were out of there in under 45 minutes. Lasco is a great man. Lasco is a great doctor, but no more than a good man. Don't get me wrong, he does his share of miracles around here, but nothing like this." Pause, no sip. "Those bullets should have cut holes clean through that husband of yours, but they were still in his body. There should have been internal bleeding, but there was very little. John was a very lucky man," Jean said. "For many reasons, I'm sure, but luck has nothing to do with this one. I tell you, I was in that room, and it was as if those bullets were trying to jump out of his body the way they came in." "What are you saying? That I'm married to the recipient of a miracle? I've been here for 15 years. I see miracles occurring on a daily basis." She paused to ponder. Jean wondered how long the cup of java would last the nurse. "Do you remember me telling you about something special being in your corner?" "Vaguely." She took a big gulp of the hot liquid, savoring the sting. That something is nothing less than God himself. Jean's eyes widened, and she jolted her head up fast to meet Gabrielle's eyes. She rid herself of the coffee in her mouth fast, and, although she tried to talk, she wound up coughing violently instead.